BioShock Infinite released in 2013, casting aside the subterranean and somewhat horror-esque mad science vibes of its first two critically acclaimed titles, instead telling an entirely new story with a completely different vision and presentation, though it did still hold on to many of the immersive storytelling shooter elements that defined the franchise from the start. It's important to keep your expectations in check in this regard, as BioShock Infinite is not a sequel to BioShock 2, nor is it a prequel. Those expecting it to be anything of the sorts may be let down by BioShock Infinite, giving its obvious departures, even though it does share some thematic objects such as the lighthouse. But if you judge it by itself, BioShock Infinite is an ambitious, and for the most part, incredible video game, even 7 years later. The game kicks off with the player assuming the role of Booker DeWitt, a man assigned to retrieve a girl named Elizabeth from Colombia in exchange for a lofty gambling debt he's run up. Pretty simple, right? Well, at least the basic premise is. After an intriguing first 2 lines of dialogue and an interesting scene in which Booker is rowed to a lighthouse by a man and a woman in the dark, he is rocketed towards Colombia and the game begins. Technically speaking, BioShock Infinite isn't the most impressive game I've ever seen, but it's damn pretty even after all this time. While the city does lack the natural mystique and the claustrophobia of Rapture, Infinite still has a very strong atmosphere. Hard shadows and deeply saturated colors make the city pop out against the gentle sky blue vistas, which creates a very unique aesthetic that feels inviting, charming, and definitely different. Not to mention the early 1910s vibe is just downright cool. Except for the background, non-important character models, which are just downright hideous, Colombia is a joy to look at, and it lends itself well to Infinite's new story. Buildings gingerly bouncing up and down in the thin air, airships flying in the distance underneath a blanket of fireworks, and light streaming through the cobblestone streets. Yeah, it's just gorgeous. Infinite's broader range of colors makes for a very welcome change to the strong green hue that defined the franchise before, and it's also a nice refuge from the throngs of otherwise very brown video games. Even the dark areas of the game have a certain lively feel to them. I don't know, there's just something about a very vibrant game that's still maturely presented that just makes me want to play it. And thankfully it does a great job holding on to the strong atmosphere all the way through. It makes for an interesting setup when you line up Infinite's new look with its thematic interests, which often clash. During the first few hours, BioShock Infinite is a game centered around the people and the ideology of Colombia. Inside this false utopia is a people ruled over by elitist ideologies, religious adoration, a crippling class system that favors white nationalist attitudes, and the meat grinder of predefined social roles. Infinite has a number of things it touches on to present these themes, such as mild forms of racism, patriotism, class disparity, slavery, and many more, portrayed via various cutscenes, graffiti, and voiceovers, or simply by having players stumble upon the material themselves, such as turning the corner and seeing a poor black man scrubbing an alleyway floor. The game also leaves messages plastered on the walls, stenciled on the posters, or carved into stone like, "Do what you're meant to do," visually showcasing the human condition of this elitist city. It's all run by Father Comstock, who seems to be somewhat of a twisted religious zealot, almost a phantom prophet of sorts, rarely seen, yet everyone seems to follow his ordinance like they're brainwashed into puppetry, worshipping the deity, erecting statues with his snowy bearded face, Christianed into his will and his servitude. I admit it's a very intriguing introduction and a nice contrast to the bright city, as it makes you question why Colombia ended up this way in spite of its paradisal beauty. Though oddly enough, BioShock Infinite does not linger on any of this subject material for very long, and that's very strange. Outside of a forced baptism, a quick-time event where you choose who to throw a baseball at, a biracial couple, or a racist announcer, and a few nods to elitism portrayed later on, BioShock ends up being a game not about the effects of this oddball, distorted anti-utopia, but rather about opening rifts into new dimensions and altering the course of the past and future. Yeah, there's quite the shift. A couple hours into the game and it really doesn't ever go back to this place. It's not to say that BioShock Infinite does nothing with these themes, but it seems more interested in using them as showcase to grab our attention and simply move past them to get to the story it really wants to tell, which is Elizabeth and the unbelievably complicated paradox of infinite, note the game title, realities, which we'll discuss a little bit later. Truth be told, it would have been nice to see Infinite have something more profound to say regarding these themes, among others it touches on, prosperity versus justice, degeneracy, the dark American history, rather than simply use them as window dressing, but they do add flavor to Colombia nonetheless. No, BioShock Infinite diverges from this material rather fast, in fact, splitting the game in two. Colombia proper and a many worlds theory time-jumping escort mission, and it's the latter that takes most of the spotlight, turning the game into an extremely linear, almost on-rails shooting game on the backdrop of Elizabeth's ability to tear through dimensions. When Booker finds Elizabeth and frees her from captivity, their fates become tangled, and the game at this point jets off into a series of very bizarre events which I can only describe as riveting, mind-boggling, and exciting. Truth be told, it's over-the-top, sometimes pretentious, and extremely preachy and very convoluted, which is both its biggest strength and its biggest weakness, as so much of the material is very interesting, yet not all of it is cohesively explained. But overall, I still really enjoyed it. The first thing I love about BioShock Infinite is that the presentation of the story is extremely well done. Firstly, the characters are top-notch. The duo of Booker and Elizabeth is fantastic, and they're a great match, as they share conflicting short-term goals, personalities, and rationale, but their long-term goals, while they don't exactly match, keep them together and pointed in the same direction. I connected instantly to Elizabeth, the imprisoned girl held hostage in a giant tower her entire life while creepy people watch her through windows, with a giant bird making sure she can never escape. When Booker rescues her and you learn of her troubled past and you see her situation, I just wanted to protect her. Morally, I did anyway, which syncs up Booker's initiative to the player, although of course for different reasons naturally. The duo really works, the voice acting is phenomenal, their motives make sense, at least for a while, the conversations are interesting, and there's plenty of both intense set pieces and these moments where one or the other's in danger, which is a great impetus for getting players to connect to them, which is very important when the ending of the game plays out. Infinite uses these two characters and really pushes the story quite fast actually, and I think without them it would have been a much less interesting game, despite all the crazy stuff that happens. Not to mention they inhabit a very linear game, which obviously has its downsides in terms of limited exploration and freedom. Guilty, there's not much really going on outside the main story of BioShock Infinite, but in exchange the player receives great pacing as the story is always moving forward, through the ups and downs, with barely any backtracking to speak of, which makes it very exciting. There's never a dull moment in BioShock Infinite. I would gladly take this setup over a game that was bigger but less focused. Infinite's gameplay, although it's pretty controversial, I think is very solid, but for different reasons than other BioShock games. Gameplay is handled through the use of guns, vigors, aka superpowers, and a very cool rail system called the Skyline. Firstly, the guns. While all the gun sound effects are awesome and surprisingly punchy, the arsenal is very basic and uninspired. Pistol, shotgun, sniper rifle, RPG. It's a letdown given what had come before with BioShock. However, the actual combat scenarios are much more interesting in my opinion, with bigger spaces to move around and much more verticality to take advantage of. Typically, fights are groups of enemies, and Infinite's biggest strength is allowing players to decide how they want to tackle each encounter. In total, the 8 vigors offer a good amount of variety, and most of them can be used in combination with each other for various benefits, like crowd control or AoE damage. Given the short playtime of Infinite, which is about 8 to 10 hours, each power is dollied out really quickly as the story progresses, and at first it almost seems overwhelming and a bit clunky to cycle through so many of them in combats with a wheel. But really, players should be specializing given the huge cost of upgrading each ability, thus condensing their preferences into a catalog that's much more manageable. Not to mention a few vigors actually overlap utility effects such as stuns, so there's really no need to use both Crows and Shock Jockey, for example, at the same time, so you'd want to upgrade one of them and stick to it. Unfortunately, the upgrade system as a whole is one of the black marks of the game in relation to combat and progression. As the game advances, a greater emphasis on being efficient with guns and ammo is necessary, as not only the game gets harder, but more guns get introduced in different timelines, which dilutes the drop table for specific ammo even further. There's really no telling what ammo will drop, and if there's no shop stations around, you might just run out of ammo and have to pick up a random gun during a fight, and if it's one you haven't upgraded, you'll have a hard time getting through those fights if playing on hard or 1999 mode. Since money is scarce and is also used to upgrade your vigors, buy ammo, lockpicks, salts, health, and practically anything in the game, it's best for players to upgrade a few specific guns and abilities and stick to them throughout the course of the game, especially since the game limits you to 2 guns at one time and no ammunition overlaps between them. So there's kind of a divide in BioShock Infinite. There's a lot of abilities and guns on offer, but the most effective way to play the game is to use as few as possible. However, I'm really only speaking in terms of the advanced difficulty options, because on normal mode, BioShock Infinite is a blast and surprisingly fluid on its feet for a BioShock game. It's quick, snappy, fluid, and combining certain vigors showers the screen in awesome effects. And the best part is you can fly around the map at times on the sky rail, which makes the gameplay even more dynamic and just straight up fun. It's a shame though you can't use vigors on the Skyrail and that there's not dedicated platforming challenges built into the story featuring the rails. It would have been pretty easy to do this since there's already full animations of Booker jumping on and off the Skyrail. I think those are both missed opportunities in terms of the gameplay departments, and you could also say that about the rift-tearing ability of Elizabeth. Why not make it a more integral part of the gameplay? But honestly, I'm being picky. I love the combats and the rail system in BioShock Infinite. Why I think the general gameplay flow works is because I feel like there's the perfect amount of just about every component in the game. For the most part, Infinite is broken up into areas and it mostly follows a formula, a dash of exploration, a sprinkle of story, and a few cutscenes for the most part, with group-based combat encounters spliced in between them. Because the game is linear, the game is able to mix the content scenarios in the way it wants, and I think they do it pretty well in this game, except the time you have to fight the same boss 3 times in a row for some reason, which is probably the worst part of the game if you ask me. Thankfully, after this section, BioShock Infinite picks up quite well and it never lets up all the way to the end. As someone who enjoyed BioShock 1 and 2, I really loved Infinite. The thing is, I wasn't disappointed by it because I acknowledged that Infinite would be totally different from the first 2 games. It braves to do something different, something new, something extraordinary, and I think it pulled it off despite its somewhat inconsistent execution. It's true, BioShock Infinite presents far too many ideas for it to ever have the time or space to explain them fully. The Vox Populi, the revolution, the many worlds theory, the ending, having infinite possibilities but also wanting to have a definite ending is like wanting to have your cake and eat it too. Granted, most of the material is well presented, but much of it doesn't have the logic behind it to make it tangible. Time travel and parallel universes always bring up problems in logic, no matter how you see it, because it's an inherently flawed concept and not quite understood. If X happens here, but there's also X here, here, and here, how could X ever change if X already went back here? That's why they call it a paradox. You can certainly play with it, but when you do, you have to suspend your disbelief because you can never fully explain it. But honestly, that doesn't make it any less entertaining to experience. Sometimes when you watch something or play something, you have to take your thinking cap off and put on your fun cap. Enjoy the ride even though you know the logic behind it has a few holes. Because nothing's perfect when there's so much nearly impossible to understand. Just like movies like Interstellar, BioShock Infinite is a very thematically ambitious piece of work, and it had a pretty tough job, presenting a massive phenomenon in a very short amount of time that almost cannot be explained. And for trying and nearly pulling it off, I commend them. I understand the growing praise the game has received because I too felt the power of its ideas, and I was glued to the adventure from start to finish. But I can also understand the sudden criticism it succumbed to shortly after that honeymoon period had worn off, for somewhat failing to make it a completely cohesive narrative experience and answering every single question that a world with infinite universes has. Still, I found BioShock Infinite to be one of the best games I've played in recent memory. The small problems it has don't really bother me all that much. The bad autosave system, the unoriginal weapons, the story that leaves more questions than answers. It's still compelling, interesting, fun, and there's a bonding with the setting and the plot that I just can't explain, and I loved it despite the story having more holes than a block of Swiss cheese. Elizabeth is a great partner, the writing is so good, the world is interesting and the gameplay is fun and the story is intriguing to the end. And the ending is poignant, even with all of its blemishes. I see the problems with BioShock Infinite, but I also appreciate it. Though flawed, it's beautiful and one of a kind, easily replayable today, even 7 years later.